Hello and welcome to another episode of the Industrial Software Podcast. I have today joining us Emily Wilkins from Marketing Metal. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Kevin.
Just to start off, do you want to give folks just a little bit of an overview of what Marketing Metal is and what you folks do?
Sure. So Marketing Metal is, I call it the anti-agency, and I work with small, mostly job shops, custom manufacturing companies, usually, mom and pop kind of family-run shops. I love working with like second-generation owners that are, trying to put their new mark on their family's legacy, and we build radical brands and websites for them, and help them with their marketing strategy, and really trying to empower them to take what we build for them and run with it, because most small shops don't have a huge marketing budget. It's just really good for them to kind of have that control and feel like they feel empowered to do their own marketing.
For sure. It's interesting that you cast it as the anti-agency. So what are some of the things about agencies that you specifically want to be anti? I know like giving them the keys like you just described is not always typical.
No.
So what are the things that you most are proud of, like kind of distinguish you as being anti the others?
Yeah, that's a big one. Like you really hit it on the head, just kind of giving them the keys and training. I'm actually working on a whole kind of training program slash like roundtable kind of a thing, mastermind thing that I'm going to be inviting my clients to kind of give them some more hands-on training with to use what we have. So yeah, that's a big part of it. Control. I've had a client that spent $15,000 on a website that didn't allow them to make text changes to it. So like didn't have access at all. So they, always have to pay an agency to make the changes. And, business just moves too fast these days for that to be a thing. So that's a big piece of it. I do have a couple clients that I work with on a retainer, but we try to work just on one project at a time, because then we really have that momentum and can focus all of our creative energy on one specific thing at once. Whereas I've worked in agencies, and I've also worked as the internal marketing person at a job shop with an outside agency, kind of been the coordinator. And that relationship, there's always just a struggle there. No one feels like they're getting what they're paying for and or being paid for. So yeah, I think just really trying to change that relationship and make it a lot more using a super streamlined process to really get them everything that they need to be successful, and also make it worthwhile for me and my team, but just making it more fun. I think that having that momentum and kind of carrying that momentum through the project that's a huge struggle, I think, with marketing work. And I think having worked with agencies before, I think that's something that they struggle with a lot. You just you get burnout on working on a project if you're, you going back to it every couple of weeks or whatever, and waiting on changes and all, it just kind of, you get bored and it starts to drag, and the initial excitement wears off. So we try to harness that and use it throughout the project.
For sure. So a lot of marketing these days is like, it's a continual verb. You can't set it and forget it, right?
Yeah.
So what are the kinds of things that you do when you're working with multiple clients to set them up for long-term success, to get them on cadences of doing these marketing activities? How do you handle that when maybe the organization doesn't have inertia there?
Yeah, so that's where that training piece came from. It's going to be part training, part like accountability and planning, and kind of helping them develop the ideas and schedule them out. And what we try to do is just capture as much content as we can in the initial project, if we're doing on-site video or photography or something, we try to shoot as much as we possibly can in the space of time that we have. And then I provide some resources to help them kind of turn that into different pieces of content. And I always give them some guidelines, like, you should be posting a couple times a week if possible. And I'm always reminding my clients too, it's not always about just what you're putting out there in terms of your own content, but also being supportive and connecting with other people, like, making sure that you're connecting with your customers and your vendors on social media and commenting on their posts and doing things like that, because that all goes a long way too.
How does that end up, those kind of responsibilities, how do those typically end up being distributed at the companies that you're working with? Like, does it end up being one person, or does it end up being kind of like a collaborative effort from a lot of the folks there? How does that breakdown work? I
think they're most successful when they include more of their team. I think it's hard for business owners sometimes to give their team that responsibility, but I definitely think that there's a ton of value in bringing more people into the process and tapping into your team's different talents. I talk a lot, like, your machinist might be a comedian. A lot of them are comedians. Like, your welder is probably an artist, because a lot of them are. So kind of tapping into those different talents and encouraging them to put their ideas forward and really get into the process and making it clear that you want them to do that. And
since a lot of the time we're talking about businesses that are literally multi-generational, it could be a family.
Yeah.
What I've seen on the ground sometimes is, and I don't want to stereotype, but usually sometimes one generation will be trying to push the business in this direction of being more out there, being more active with marketing activities and things like that. Mm-hmm. And it's not as native to, others at the company. Mm-hmm. Have you dealt with instances of almost kind of culture clash? And is that impression that I'm getting of, like, this is actually happening a lot in these businesses? Is this true? Is my hunch correct?
Yeah, I think you do see that. Most of the companies that I work with, because I tend to, it tends to be the owner or president, or, the director of sales. Those are like the main people that kind of come to me and want to work with me. So since they're kind of leading the charge, I think it's less of an issue, because they're the ones that are all for it. I think just accepting that the different generations see, digital marketing in different ways, and even like, embracing that in your content, like making fun of the fact that your, grandpa machinist doesn't like to go on video and talk about, or, doesn't know what Facebook is or TikTok is or whatever, just, I don't know. I think that there's some comedic elements that can be pulled out of that for sure, if they're willing. Obviously, if someone's not into it, they're not gonna, you're probably not gonna convince them. But
yeah, it's funny. I was talking to a smaller parts supplier at an event, and someone on staff was saying our website's 20 years old as like a negative thing. Mm-hmm. And actually, what I was thinking in that moment was, that means your company's been around for 20 years. That means you're doing a lot of things correct.
For sure, yeah.
What kinds of like institutional knowledge are you able to, like, as you're maybe like rebranding or like modernizing the marketing activities of these companies, how do you capture a lot of the legacy institutional knowledge where like a lot of the real amazing, like mind-blowing value is held?
Mm-hmm. Video is so powerful, and just getting those people to talk on video, that's something that I'm pretty good at, if I do say so myself.
I would agree there.
Just getting those people to open up and be themselves on camera and really, really talk about that, show that pride in what they do and show the value that they bring to the table. And we need to learn from each other. We all have different things to bring to the table, right? So the young generation can learn from the older generation all the knowledge that they have, and even hearing about how they did things 20 years ago, it kind of gives us a different perspective on how we do things now. And on the flip side, obviously, having the younger generation show the older generation like how you can connect with a customer in California, and just with a quick Google search and finding that community, like showing how you can find that kind of community online in a digital space. So
I also heard from some folks that like they get leads from their online activities, but sometimes those leads, they will assume they might be of a lower quality because they're coming from online. It kind of like was their impressions of the kind of value you get from your web presence, and maybe it's not as valuable. And I was thinking, well, maybe the targeting is wrong there. Maybe it's not. So is that something that you've encountered, or maybe misconceptions around that?
I think you really hit it there when you talked about, or you said the positioning, right?
Or something like that. Maybe it's not finding the right audience.
The targeting and the positioning. I mean, the way that you're presenting your shop and talking about the kinds of customers that you like to work with, and there's some different kind of fail safes that you can put into your process, your user experience journey to like weed out some of that low quality traffic. I think too, I'm known for calling out bad SEO practices because there are some out there. And I think where you publish your website online matters. If you have an SEO company that's just posting, links to your site on just random blog sites that are super spammy and just getting a lot of spam traffic, that's where you're going to get a lot of that spam traffic from. Whereas on the flip side, if you're actually doing the PR work of, submitting articles to industry publications and, and getting listed in these industry publications that are specific to your business, you're going to get higher quality traffic from those places versus just any old random blog on the internet, which seems obvious, but it's, when machine shop owners are not, they don't know what they don't know, right? They don't know how the web works in a lot of cases. And, and agencies will use big terms that they don't understand, and it just doesn't, makes things confusing, and they don't know what questions to ask. And so there's things like that.
Yeah. So you brought up SEO, and this is something I've been wanting to ask you about. When you're talking about SEO, and a lot of just analytics and things that you traditionally use to guide marketing activities, it relies on numbers. Like what % of this converts into this? And, like what % of this traffic to some keyword can we capture with our SEO? In a lot of industrial spaces, the volumes are so low.
So low.
A lot of this goes out the window. And I personally have not known how to navigate this a lot.
Yeah.
So how do you find signal? And, usually you're trying to find signal in the noise, but here I'm just trying to find signal.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with this kind of like unknown aspect of like low volume stuff?
Yeah, that is a great question. And I don't know if I have the complete answer.
I don't know if anyone does. But like, what are you doing to try to navigate? Because I'm dealing with this too. I think everyone in this space deals with this.
For sure, yeah. I think the best thing that you can do is really just talk to your customers and find out what they're asking about. When they're doing their research on your service or whatever, what are the things that they're typing into Google, and then writing content about that, and then looking at your analytics based on that. So it's, again, not the traditional kind of way that SEO is done for, doctors' offices and all these other things that are very SEO heavy. They have to do SEO that way. Otherwise, they're not going to get found. But yeah, for our stuff, since it's so niche and so low volume, I really think the best place to start is just talking to your customers and finding out what they're, what kind of things they're looking for when they go to search the internet. And yeah, paying attention to how much time they're spending on those pages and seeing if there's better ways to present the information, and readability is a huge thing that people don't always pay attention to. And I think that search engines are paying a lot more attention to that. So making sure that your content is super well organized, and like we started putting basically like a little table of contents at the beginning of every article that link to the different sections. That stuff goes a really long way. And speaking in human terms, short sentences in human language and not just using a ton of jargon, like that's always going to be better too.
For me, I try to remember, I'll be myself listening to some podcast related to something deep tech, industrial, whatever, and there's 10 views on it. And it's the most fascinating thing I've ever heard. Mm-hmm. And it's like the most information dense podcast I've ever heard. And so I have to remind myself, like if you come across these things with low views, one of those people might be a huge enterprise customer, and one of those people might convert to a huge sale and bring along someone else.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, volume is not everything, especially in our super niche industries. Like, volume is really not that important in the grand scheme of things. It's quality of traffic is what you're looking for.
So along those lines, how do you then kind of try and figure out what quality you're getting and adjust from there? So like from my end, I've been trying to figure out like, how do I convert this into an interaction between me and them as soon as possible? Like they're not just a bounce on the page. They are, the beginning of some kind of a relationship, That's been what I've been trying to lean towards, but is that something that you ascribe to as well?
Definitely. Yeah. You always want to know what the next step is for that viewer and make it enticing and interesting and something that they'll want to take that next step. Your next call to action is always should always be a priority, and just removing barriers, thinking about what in that moment, wherever they are on your website, what are they trying to find, and making sure that you're providing that to them.
On the topic of websites, am I correct that a lot of the like actual website activities that Marketing Metal does, it's WordPress?
We do WordPress. Okay. However, depending on the client, I often will suggest Squarespace.
Okay.
I just think it's, again, I think job shops have, they tend to have limited marketing budgets. It's just easier. Everything's there. They don't have to worry about security and plugins breaking things, all of that. They have great chat support, email support, that kind of thing. But it kind of depends on the client. If they're, if search optimization is something that they're really strongly interested in and, want to rely on, then we might look at WordPress just because there's a little bit more, there's more functionality there for search optimization and tracking and all of that. And if they're, if they have complex needs, they need their website to have more functionality than just, just a blog and whatever, then we might look at WordPress. But I've really liked Squarespace. It's easy to use. And yeah, most developers would turn their nose up at that for sure. But, they'd scoff at that idea. But
so I actually don't turn my nose up at it. And I kind of want to dig into this because a lot of our audience might not know how radical it is for a marketing agency to be in the position where they're recommending Squarespace to clients. That is a tectonic shift.
Oh, yeah.
And I think it underscores a lot of the positive aspects of how you've approached your agency. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of WordPress is very cumbersome for... Okay, yes. So let's take... Sorry, I'm going to go on a little nerd rant for a second. Let's take pros of WordPress. Let's take pros of WordPress.
Okay.
Number one, it's open source. most of, or like a huge percentage, maybe like 40% ish of the internet runs on WordPress. WordPress
Yeah.
isn't a
It's more than
juggernaut.
40%, isn't it?
It's more. I'm sure it's more. It's huge.
Yeah.
It's just everywhere.
Yeah.
And the fact that something open source has that much market share is like impossible.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen. It's like
Yeah.
if Firefox was as used as Google Chrome. You know,
Right.
it's like it's just wild that history happened in such a way that most of the internet runs. Now we have obviously Linux runs most of the internet, but
Yeah.
but WordPress does too, and that's beautiful. And so I've always kind of cheered for it. And
Yeah.
there's a WordPress community. There's like
Oh yeah.
cool people use WordPress. There's a WordPress community in my hometown here, and I go and hang out at their meetup. I love these people.
Yeah.
So I'm rooting for it.
Yeah.
But but there's a
But.
billion problems with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's great when you're a developer and you understand HTML and you're used to WordPress and you understand how websites work and how the internet works, and it's a great tool. Like, it does anything you want it to do. But if you want to be a little bit more hands off and still have like a level of control and know that your site is secure and you don't have that knowledge, WordPress is difficult to say.
Right.
Yeah.
I also believe it definitely encourages the relationship between marketing agencies and clients of not giving them the keys.
Yeah.
Because you oftentimes host it for them, you run it on your own. Now, I'm sorry to anyone listening who does this, because there are a lot of benefits if you have a
For sure.
marketing agency that does this dynamic well,
Yes.
which is hard to do well. So
Yes.
props to you if you do it well.
Yes.
But a lot of times they don't give them the keys.
Yeah.
Is that
Which is
part of
fine.
the? Yeah,
It's
which
fine.
is it can be fine.
It's fine if you're if you're a corporation with a big marketing budget and you can, afford to spend your marketing dollars on retaining a development agency. But that's not the case for most job shops.
Now, here's my next line of questions, which is, so I actually tried to help someone get a little bit of a web presence going.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want to go the WordPress route because I wanted them to be able to just log in and do their stuff. So then you have your whole bucket of options, which is like Webflow, Squarespace, Wix, all of those. None of them seem to accommodate the marketing agency client dynamic. So with Squarespace, are you able to like get them set up, make the site, hand it over to them, and then you can log in and make changes, or they can log in and make changes?
Yeah.
Okay. See, that's what I was
there's a collaborator thing. You just add people to it. So
Okay.
I think it probably has a limit on how many collaborators you can have, but it's like 5. It's not. Yeah.
So how have the clients reacted to that? Being able to log in and update things. Do they do that?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Some are better than others. And
Okay.
again, kind of why I'm planning this like training piece of it, because I think having a little bit more hand-holding like throughout the year to give them more confidence in using it and working with it. I had one client that was on WordPress and their site was like so disjointed and it really was a mess. And there was some plugins that were doing some really funny things. Plugins were breaking things all the time and like it just never was working properly. And then they got into HubSpot and HubSpot was telling them to like host their blogs on HubSpot, which is like completely opposite of the point of a blog. Like the point of the blog is to drive traffic to your website. So why would you put it on HubSpot? Yeah. Anyway, they just were having so much trouble with it, and they had an intern at one point that was doing stuff, and every time they logged in, they were like frustrated. It reminded me of like me when I started my business, and anytime I would log into QuickBooks and try to do something, I was just like end up in tears. Like that's what it sounded like when she was describing too. So when we launched their Squarespace site, I mean, told me several times, like, editing my website is a breeze now. She calls it a breeze, and just loves going in there and being able to do her blog and all of that. So it's really so much more intuitive.
I've heard, though, like everything has its pros and cons. I've
For
heard
sure.
Squarespace has a little bit of a problem with page load speed sometimes. Is that something you've run into?
There's things that you can do to fix that, and I think that they've gotten better with every iteration on that too.
Yeah, and that's part of the benefit. If you opt into a platform like that,
Mm-hmm.
any improvements they make, you get automatically. So,
Right. Yeah.
Changing gears just a little bit. So you do marketing, which I would almost say is a bit of an undersell. There's a ton of things that you do. And I would encourage folks to go listen to the interview that was done with Elite Automation's podcast, the Marketing Come Up, I believe it's called.
Yeah. Manufacturing come up. Yeah.
Manufacturing Come Up, yeah.
Yeah.
Which was a great interview and a lot of kind of broad strokes things there. But in that, you talked about your background is broader than just marketing. You did product development, you did things like that. Mm-hmm. And one thing that really stood out to me was that you described the product development process and the marketing process as being kind of like, in some ways, married.
For sure.
And that actually isn't a dynamic that I've encountered that often. So I was curious if you could tell me a little bit about like how those two things fit together in your previous roles.
Yeah. So I come from the toy industry, which is funny. Actually, I have my Emily train from my first job. I worked on the Thomas the Tank Engine team.
For those who are listening to the audio version, she just held up a super cool Thomas the Tank Engine right there.
Thomas's best friend's name is Emily. So I have my green Emily train.
There you go.
Right next to my my manufacturing millennial and
awesome
manufacturing happy hour, Chris Luke.
Oh my gosh. Are those 3D printed or what?
They're the little Lego.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. Anyway, so yeah.
Shouts out to those folks too as well, by the way.
Jake Hall and Chris Luke are two of my favorite people. I love them.
Oh yeah.
Jake has been just such a huge supporter. I actually had lunch with him this week. He's amazing.
Very cool.
And both of them are just such huge advocates for women in manufacturing and just progress in general. You know, they're just great. So yes, I started in the toy industry, and actually I was thinking about this the other day. The reason I ended up in the toy industry, I've always been like I babysat a lot as a kid, and I was always the fun babysitter that brought like crafts and like arts and like I love watching cartoons, and I'm just a little kid at heart. And then in high school, I actually got school credit to work at a little mom and pop toy store in town. And it was like a kind of a boutique-y toy store. And then I had mentioned that to a friend in college, and I was looking for a new co-op job in marketing. And he's like, well, my uncle is the VP of sales at a toy company in Chicago. You want me to talk to him? And I was like, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. So yeah, I worked at a toy company in Chicago. It was called RC2 at the time. It's now owned by Tomy, I believe. They did the die-cast cars, like the Hot Wheels and die-cast trains. And we had a lot of like Disney licenses and Thomas, obviously, and different things like that. So, but yeah, marketing and product development were always in the same area. I would work with our factories in China. You know, I'd have to give them super clear direction on what we're looking for, and they would build prototypes for us and send them over. And then and a lot of times we would have to do the marketing before we had final parts from China. We would have to do a lot of our photography and stuff with prototypes. So they would, we'd get different iterations of the prototypes and then send feedback to them, and I'd have to take photos of each item and send them feedback, or do some photoshopping if we needed to put them in our brochures or whatever. So yeah, and then marketing was always kind of the research arm of that too. So we're, marketing is talking to customers and, understanding what they like about the products and what they're interested in, what trends are happening. So all of that feeds back into product development and, coming up with your next product line for next year. And
so the talking to customers part is something I could stand to learn a lot about. So when I do that, it's with software, but not with physical things. It's really hard to remove myself from the interaction enough to not be confirming my biases or hearing what I want to hear or guiding them in the directions that I want them to go in and things like that, and actually be learning from them. Do you have strategies around that, or like was that a difficulty for you as well? Like, how did you navigate that situation?
That's a really good question.
Because that's the thing I'm not good at. I like to talk, and I need to train myself to listen more.
Yeah.
Says the guy with the podcast.
It's a good question. Yeah, I'm working with a EDM shop in California right now. These guys are very sweet. They've been doing EDM work for, 30, 40 years. They're in their 60s, 70s. And they're kind of trying to, modernize their shop. And it was really hard for me to pull some of that out of them. Like, what are your customers looking for when they're looking for your stuff? Are they specifically looking for EDM always? I was really trying to get to the basics of it. And it's hard to remove yourself, for sure. It's easy to forget how much knowledge you have and go back to that toddler exploring the world viewpoint, trying to take all of your knowledge out of the equation and start fresh. But I think it depends on, I guess, what you're trying to find out from your customers.
For sure. Now, turning towards your customers, how are you finding that the relationship typically starts? I know you've been active at events, so maybe it's folks that you meet there. It could be your own online marketing efforts. What's been tending to work for you on your end?
Yeah, being active on LinkedIn has definitely helped. I haven't had to do much like cold calling. It's really hard. Cold calling is always hard. I really sort of started my business in like 2011 and I was too young and not well enough connected to actually be successful with it. So it's hard to go out there and talk to people and find problems that they have that you can solve and convince them that you're the right person to solve them. Most of my work has been referral, thankfully, but the LinkedIn stuff is working. The California company, for example, they reached out to me on LinkedIn. They had seen a couple of my posts. One in particular, I had said, like, I was talking about posting on social media. Like, your audience doesn't care about your machine specs and capabilities. They care, they care about why you're passionate about what you do and, what I can't remember exactly what the post said, but he was like, everything you said I shouldn't be doing is exactly what I thought I should be doing. So what am I doing wrong? So messaging is huge, though, for that. If you have a really clear message that's getting to the heart of your customers' problems and helps them self-identify, that is huge. And that's why I'm have been successful on LinkedIn. It's because I'm specifically talking to small job shop, to family-owned mom and pop job shops. There are quite a few agencies out there that are manufacturing specific now, but none of them are targeting job shops. So, they might have a couple job shop clients, but that's not specifically who they're working with. And I think job shops, they're kind of a different animal, which is why I've been successful. So I'm really getting to the heart of the pain points that they have, which is they hate working with marketing agencies. So just really getting to the heart, I think, of your customers' actual struggles and talking in their terms, that's huge. And if you're doing that consistently and you're actually, getting out there online in the right place and connecting with the right people, that's going to be huge for you. And actually, we were talking about SEO before, like there's so much content out there on the internet now that, we're almost at a tipping point, I think, where social media is becoming more important than SEO because you're websites are getting lost among all of the content because people have been saying for 10 years, 10 plus years that content is king. So that's what, agencies and businesses have been doing is just pumping out content. Social media is getting more crowded as well. So it's really just finding those communities and finding the right people to connect with that can lift you up. And, like Jake and Chris, just making connections with people that are adjacent to you in your industry. And, like some of the other industrial marketing agencies, we're connected on LinkedIn and we comment on each other's posts. And, we're always supportive of each other because there's plenty of work for everyone. It's not like we need to be like fighting each other tooth and nail for work, right?
What you just described totally lines up with what I've been seeing of social media being really the linchpin going forward of a lot of things. Mm-hmm. But there's something difficult, another dynamic that I've been seeing play out, which is that individuals do fantastically.
Yeah.
Organizations have a hard time.
Yeah.
People don't get fired up about following a brand.
Nope.
I mean, like, people aren't all in a tizzy following Tesla on Twitter. They're all in a tizzy following Elon on Twitter. You have to have a human as the company. And case in point, you mentioned Jake and Chris. I mean, it's like these are brands that are, and people talk about this in like big media influencers like Mr. Beast becoming a business. But I don't think a lot of people realize that this is happening in industrial media as well. We are in influencer central.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, you don't.
So I've been trying to operate under a brand. Mm-hmm. And that is not working at all. I don't like to use social media personally.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, great. I'll do it all under a brand. And then, no, that's not working. So a job shop has a hard time spinning up a, eye-catching personality as the front person of a social media empire. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah.
So how are you seeing this as well? And Are there ways to make a brand tangible enough to compete in a landscape of faces?
Yes. You're absolutely right. Companies are not doing as well as faces. People do business with people. We don't do business with companies. Sure, there's brands that people love to get behind, like Tesla and like BMW or, Patagonia, whatever. There are brands that people actually want to follow and pay attention to. But I think those brands are successful because they're getting to the heart of the human matters behind their brand. It's lifestyle branding, right? Lifestyle advertising. It's showing that this is the lifestyle that you subscribe to when you buy from this from this company or whatever. Like these are the values that you hold. That we care about in our brand, that kind of thing. So the more human that you can be in your marketing it's always going to be better. But yeah, I think I always encourage my clients to have a face, use someone's personal social media accounts to promote your business. It doesn't always, they're not always excited about it or open to it. And that's, again, part of what I'm trying to do with this kind of roundtable, whatever I'm going to call it. I haven't done the branding work on it yet, but because I think anyone can do it. It's scary, but it's not impossible. It's not hard. Even if you don't have experience or feel like you want to be online all the time, it's just a matter of making time for it. Yeah, there is still a place for the company brand. LinkedIn, I think, has been promoting the company brands a little bit more recently. And I have a couple clients that we're posting on their business page on LinkedIn, and it does okay. It's not going to get the amount of traffic that the president of the company gets ever. It's still important.
Yeah, there's no kind of getting around it.
No.
If you're in the audience and you're like, I don't want to be the social media person, I get it, and I think we have to get over ourselves.
Yeah, totally. I know.
I think that's just how it is these days.
Yeah, I was the same way. I mean, I still I don't spend a lot of time on social media.
I spend a ton of time there reading. I just, I read, but I don't want to.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the value that I see people get who are doing it is just unbelievable. So.
Yeah, and I mean that's exactly why, because I think we all know how hard it is to do that, to like be vulnerable and consistently putting your life out there on,
Yeah.
on the internet.
You're doing it very well.
Oh, thank you.
So mad props. Yeah.
Thank you. I've
Rock
been a little behind recently, but we do what we can. So
yeah.
yeah.
Couple of other questions. So first off, so we were just talking about how the relationship tends to start with you and your clients. Do you feel like when it starts out, they pretty much know what they need and it's pretty much on target? Or is it more that their stated goals and needs are different from what you perceive them as?
Sort of both, I guess. The EDM shop in California, for example, they came to me asking me to submit a proposal for SEO services. And I went to their website and I was like, you have a milling machine as your hero image. Your homepage. Like, that's not screaming EDM to me. So there's some issues that we need to work on there. But so I think it depends. It depends on how much knowledge they have. Some come in and they've done some research and they kind of have a rough idea of what they're looking for, or they have very specific things that they are particular about, but they're still open to my recommendations as an expert. My process actually is really helpful with that, starting with, because I kind of have this two-step process where we start with the setup. I do like the discovery piece is what most agencies call it. I do that as a product for clients instead of having it be this kind of rushed thing that that the agency uses to put together their massive proposal. I flipped that over and I charge for it actually, but I put a lot more effort into it, if that makes sense. So it's asking clients to put a little skin in the game. It also signals to them that I am going to give them something that's really valuable that they can, that kind of stands on its own in its value. And it does, because I provide a full, kind of detailed plan with some strategy and positioning. I talk about, I present some research, some market research, and where I think that they can really shine. And I think that really works well. And I spend 2 hours really listening to where they are, where they've been, what they've tried, what their big dreams are, what their, I really get into the details of like what customers do you really love to work with? Why? What are some things that have really worked well for you in the past? So we even touch on like business and sales processes. And yeah, I think that has been really successful for me. And it also puts me in that position of, they see me as an expert. So they're open to my suggestions. Yes.
I want to talk a little bit about the macro situation. I went to 3 events this year. I went to Automate Show, IMTS, and then FabTech. And those 3 shows kind of hit along 3 distinct points in our trajectory of entering a recession-y thing. I don't know what people call a recession-y thing. How are you preparing for the next phase that we're entering? And how directly do you think it's going to impact yourself and other folks like yourself?
I don't know. I mean, I think, yeah, there's always going to be ups and downs, but in the grand scheme of things, I don't think the downs are going to be as far down or last as long as they have in the past, because there's so much growth, like exponential growth in technology, and one part of the world is hurting. There's other parts of the world that aren't hurting, like COVID, for example. I mean, there were some shops that were struggling and really had weren't getting any POs through the door at that time, but then I think there were other shops that were, finding ways to still get business. And yeah, I don't know. I feel like there's so much coming in terms of economic growth and technology, where like we might be slowing down a little bit, but I don't see it lasting that long. And I think one of the most important things that you can do to prepare for that is build your brand and your marketing reach. So so I haven't seen it really affect me. I had to pivot during COVID. I really had a bunch of people coming to me wanting websites built because they were like, oh, this is a golden opportunity for me to start my business because I have nothing else to do. So be smart about where you're spending money, and, invest in your brand, and being able to connect with your customers, I think, is always going to be a good strategy. Don't buy a bunch of inventory.
I would say that makes a ton of sense. I mean, like, focus on your foundations, focus on your fundamentals. Mm-hmm. And if you're not getting slammed with new work, maybe it's a good breather to focus on some fundamentals of your branding and things like that. So I think I would put a lot of stock in that.
Yeah, and like training. I was talking with a shop a couple weeks ago too about like they've slowed down a little bit in the last couple months, and he just said they're really using it as an opportunity to cross train everyone because they want to be able to, as you know, talent is a really vital component of manufacturing right now. That's not that's been a struggle for a lot of businesses. So I think the more the more collaborative and cross-trained your team can be, the better. The more interesting it will be for them, and the more sort of connected I think they'll feel and validated too. So yeah, there's always an opportunity. You just gotta look for it.
There you go. Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on and talking to me and sharing all this with the audience. For everyone out there, how would you think it's best for them to connect with you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. Emily Joanne Wilkins on LinkedIn. You can look at my website, marketingmetal.com. And yeah.
Everyone should do that immediately. All right. Thanks for joining us, and have a good one.
Thank you so much, Kevin.
All right. Bye.